You have two factions today in the Tea Party, and they're very clearly defined. You have one faction that is comprised of what I deem Republican Party apologists. In other words, their allegiance to the Republican Party knows no bounds. I've often, in an attempt at humorously making the point, have said, you know, they could watch a Republican legislator, you know, stab someone to death on video, you know, with 6 witnesses, and still, you know, try to conjure up some justification and forgiveness for what they just seen. So you have that faction within the Tea Party. And then you have the faction over here, the reformers, the rebels, the revolutionaries. I pride myself on my honesty, my own personal integrity, so I'm just going to say this. I'm not sure if we have time to form a third party. I'm not sure if we have time to see the Libertarian Party. We're running out of time, and I'm going to touch on that in more detail in a moment. But those of us who will no longer accept the lesser two evils, that side, within that division in the Tea Party, that side is growing. Evidence of that in King William and Hanover, where I invited Rob to come out and speak. Rob got 10% in those 2 counties. That is, I played an active role in a challenge former Senator and Governor George Allen in the Republican primary last year, and that candidate that I worked on behalf of in Hanover and King William County, she got 48% of the vote. So we went toe-to-toe, nose-to-nose with a former U.S. Senator and a governor in those 2 counties. So I'm very proud of the following we have built and developed over the last 4 years out there, and the influence that the Mechanicsville Tea Party and the King William Tea Party has. And at the end of my term, which ends this month, I will begin the process. I have a meeting in Bedford, Virginia, sometime next week. I will begin the process of building a new state organization, because I think the Federation, God bless them for all the hard work the Federation has done, and I have a lot of good friends in the Federation. God bless them for the work they've done. But after 4 years, I think it's fair to question their effectiveness, whether or not they have moved the needle at all at the state level. And I am of the opinion they have not. So to just share with you a little bit of my background and give you some insight into why there is not this monolithic voice within the Tea Party. It's very divided. Now, where is it divided? Where do libertarians and conservatives generally find areas of agreement that I think we can work together and have great impact? On the constitutional, the fiscal, and the social issues, those 3 areas, I am a recurring guest speaker at a government class at Georgetown University. They, believe it or not, Georgetown University started a course, an actual course, the Tea Party and the Religious Right. So Clyde Wilcox, the professor, who's a friend of mine, when he told me about this, I scoffed. And I said, you know, what do any of you pointy heads at Georgetown know about the Tea Party? And I was serious in my challenge. And he said, well, why don't you come up here and present, you know, the other side of the story? Because obviously I didn't feel like those students were really hearing a balanced assessment of the Tea Party movement. And I've been up there now numerous times. I go up on a regular basis. Was up there just 2 weeks ago to talk to one of his classes to give them the other side. But on those 3 issues, constitutional, fiscal, and social, I think on the constitutional issues and on the fiscal issues, there is a great deal of agreement between the libertarians and conservatives within the Tea Party. I mean, you can almost go down the line on those two areas, and the agreement is pretty strong. It is the social issues, and within the Tea Party movement, there's a great deal of very devout evangelicals within the Tea Party. Now, when I introduced Rob, and I'm sure he'll remember this, before I made the introduction, I asked those in attendance that night, raise your hands if you think the United States today would be a better nation. We'd have less problems less cultural problems in society if the country had adhered and stuck closely to and abided by the basic tenets of the Constitution. Every hand in the room went up. And I was kind of setting this up. And I knew where I was going with this. The next question I asked them was, what does the Constitution say about marriage? It says nothing. What did the founders intend? That's the case. They didn't address it. What's the remedy? States. Okay. Unfortunately, we have some activist judges who don't seem to want to let the states alone when they make a decision. But on those issues, I think rather than to constantly war with one another, whether it's the decriminalization of certain drugs, and there are many within that evangelical, social, conservative base of the Tea Party who adamantly oppose the decriminalization. I mean, you can make, Rob and I can sit here and run down a litany of economic arguments. I think the military-industrial complex is very similar to the prison-industrial complex is not as large, but I think there's a great deal of similarities if you look at what Eisenhower warned us about at the end of his presidency, and that was the military-industrial complex. You know, we've been in a perpetual state of war for the last 40 years. And I think, you know, you connect the dots. You know, I'm a former Marine. No one is going to be a stronger advocate for a strong national defense, but I'm also not a fool. And I also see where we've spilled a lot of blood and treasure over some highly questionable endeavors. Now, not to ignore the fact that we are still dependent on fossil fuel, and there is a strategic economic interest in maintaining Straits of Hormuz remain open. You know, whatever we have to do to do that, since I think it'll be another 30 or 40 years until the technology actually develops, where it'll be available on a commercial scale to get away from the use of fossil fuels. It's not going to happen. I don't care how much money we spend. That's not going to happen anytime sooner than the next 30 or 40 years, in my opinion. On the butting heads over these social issues, I think the introduction, the night that Rob spoke at our groups, and the way that I went about pointing out and have subsequently told our members, if you say you believe in the Constitution, don't be a hypocrite because you don't get your way. You know, if we're to use our religious convictions, our faith, however deep and abiding it may be, if we're to use those beliefs as a foundation for law or making policy, how are we any different than Iran? So when you point out this hypocrisy to conservatives who really have strong feelings about same-sex marriage, about abortion, about decriminalization of drugs, you can't force them, snap your fingers and force them to change those views that they've held most of their life. But you can, as Rob so eloquently pointed out, and King William the night he spoke, use the power of your personal conviction to change people's minds. That takes me back to the integrity, independence, and intellect. You know, 5 minutes into listening to Rob, and I'd never met him before, went to his website, read what I read about him. 5 minutes into listening, I said to the person,
Next to me in Mechanicsville, I can see now why Cuccinelli and McAuliffe doesn't want to get on stage. I mean, you're like watching Intuit Indians club a baby seal to death. Literally. It literally would have been. It would have been pitiful. At the same time, you have to have that intellect because you have to have the capacity to grasp the complexities of some very difficult, challenging issues. And I sized Rob up and came to, okay, I can check that box. He has the intellectual capability to grasp the complexities of these issues. Integrity. Well, that was, again, probably one of the easiest of those three issues. We had nothing. That was one of the worst. I'm a native of central Pennsylvania, but I've lived in Virginia since the late 70s. And I have never seen a worst run campaign in the 30+ odd years that I've been in this state. It was an embarrassment to all Virginians, or it should have been. I mean, he's a scumbag. No, he's a bigger scumbag. No, he's an even bigger scumbag. No, he's a, where was the context? Where was the content of what their plans were for Virginians if they were elected to that office? It was despicable. It genuinely was. I think the questions of their integrity, the other two candidates that Rob ran against, there's no doubt in my mind their integrity has been, how do I politically say this? One should be in jail, and the other one came perilously close to joining the last 4 years. And I would say they could share a cell with Bob McDonald. Now, obviously in Republican circles, those kinds of comments are not going to win me much adulation. But that's okay because I'm not running it for anything. I have 3 kids, and now 11 grandchildren. And I know the wonderful life I've had, wonderful opportunities this country has provided for me, my 3 children and 11 grandchildren. I see those opportunities, same opportunities, slipping away. I see my grandchildren, the oldest one's 12, they get to college age, I see them coming back home and living with their parents for a definite period of time. There won't be this time. I have an economic background and I understand what's coming, how this is going to unfold. Now, when you take into account that we've checked off the box on intellect, we've checked off the box on integrity, you got the question of independence. Has somebody got their hooks in this guy? And that's always a challenge with political candidates. Somebody has their hooks in it. Crony capitalism thrives in this country. And it's not just at the national level, but it certainly applies at the state level as well. Things that Rob has said on his site and in his public appearances, where he walked into 2 Tea Party groups and openly stated his support for some policy positions and issues that he knew were not going to go down well in that room. Check the independence box. And I had the guy that I thought would have made a wonderful governor, and hopefully in the future he's a young man, will be a governor of Virginia at some point in the future. The issue of where conservatives and libertarians can continue to build bridges. I'm not so sure if we can't begin to achieve some success at the state and even at the congressional level with libertarian candidates. Because again, you have increasing numbers of conservatives who are fed up. I mean, I have pummeled
Republican Party relentlessly for the last 2.5 years. And I think subsequently you have a lot of folks who have said, you know, well, it's not sometimes pleasant to listen to what Bob Shannon has to say. The guy is at least objective. You know, I am not a water boy for the Republican Party. Some of the Tea Party groups, they are. Some of the Tea Party groups are nothing but water boys for local Republican Party establishments. That's the truth. I will not carry water for anyone. I openly supported a Democrat candidate for local office in King William County, effectively running his campaign. He took on an entrenched Republican incumbent who had served one term on the Board of Supervisors, and I felt like he had to go. He's one of the, you know, local government is a good old boy. You know, it's builders and developers. I mean, that's really who runs local government. I don't know what we even have town councils, city councils, mayors for. Just let the developers and builders come in and do it. I mean, they're behind the scenes doing it anyway. So I got behind this Democrat. Now, this is in 2011. You can imagine the things that were said about me, and are still being said today. He won in a rural county. A 300-vote margin is a landslide in a district race. You know, where you only have 1,200 votes cast. A 300-vote margin is a landslide. This young man was almost a recluse. He was shyer than my 2.5-year-old granddaughter. I'd say, Stephen, you got to shake people's hands. You got to look them in the eye. You know, they're not going to bite you. You know, if you're going to run for public office, there's a certain you're going to have to set aside for a minute. Your reservations, your personal reluctance to open yourself up and shake people's hands, look them in the eye, tell them what you intend to do. So he won, and he won big. In the last 2 budget cycles, 3 of the 5 members of the King William Board of Supervisors are Republicans. One supervisor pushed for a 5% spending cut across the board. The Democrat. Now, when people have chastised me, called me names, and I often tell them, you know, well, I'll tell you, you know, the former Marine, that really hurts me. Names, you know, I'm very sensitive. You know, even the drill instructors, when I went through Paris Island 42 years ago, said he's a sensitive lad. Let's take it easy on him. The point being, the only Democrat on that board, and he stood up for the local schools. He stood up for the social service agencies, all the folks that were coming in there that every year come in there with their hand out, want increases in their budgets. He said, we're cutting the budget across the board 5%, and he stuck to his guns. He bought a lifetime of endearment for me, and I will trudge through snow and freezing rain if he decides to run again in 2 years. And my critics who came out and said, you know, I think Bob Shannon's a big progressive. You know, he's a wolf in sheep's clothing. My critics, my most vocal critics, when they publicly challenged me on my support for Mr. Stephen Greenwood, the Democrat, I just said to them, let me make sure, I always like to not make an emotional analysis. I like to make a consciously thoughtful, deliberate analysis of the situation. And he taught us that in the Marine. Don't overreact emotionally. Assess the situation, see what's going on around you, and make a decision. So I assessed the situation, the whirlwind going on around me, all the criticism, all the, Bob must have lost his mind. And I said to my critics, you can change an honest man's opinion, but you can't make a dishonest man honest. So I was able to sit down with Stephen and convince him that local government had gotten too big, they spent too much money, they were involved in too many functions the government had no business being in the first place, and I changed an honest man's mind. So those Republican officials at the local level in King William and Hanover, who the developers had in their pockets, I cast them aside in favor of an honest man who I felt like I could work with. And if you don't have that honesty and that integrity, you can put whatever letter you want next to their name. And what do you got? You got a scumbag that can be bought by the first person that comes along with a few dollars in the pocket. And the crony capitalist that controls our political system today is representative of that. So go down that checklist before you decide to climb on board, regardless of your political affiliation or your political philosophy, and ask those 3 questions. Does that candidate have integrity, intellect, and independence? Make that your jumping off point before you make your decision on who you're going to support. I think the Tea Party and the Libertarian Party, and I hope you understand I have openly advocated here today, I'll work with a Democrat, I'll work with someone on the Libertarian ticket, and I have every hope that a candidate we're vetting right now to challenge Congressman Cantor, you will invite him in here to speak to you. Because remember, it's not about winning. It's about principles. It's about principles. I've had these people in the Tea Party for the last 4 years saying, Bob, the emotional type, the ones you'd never want to be in combat with. The emotional types that get all, up in arms. Bob, we gotta win. We gotta win. Well, Republicans have run Virginia for the last 4 years. Please tell me what we want. Besides that $6 billion tax increase,
yeah, we got a big old
did we
tax
reform?
increase.
Yeah.
That's what we got.
Did we reform Medicaid, consuming 21% of the state's budget? Any progress on reforming Medicaid? No. Illegal immigration, $1 billion a year. $1 billion a year. Did we make any progress on it? No. School choice. I said to Delegate Peace, Republicans are running everything, Chris. When are we going to get some action? When are we going to get some movement on these issues? And what do you have? You have these Republican Party apologists within the Tea Party who all during that 6-8 weeks, I'll tell you something, brother, I took some bruises. I took some bruises. And that 6 to 8 weeks leading up to the election, all I heard was, Bob, you got to abandon support Sarvis. We got to win. There comes a point in time when you say, I'm even surrounded by some people who don't have the intellect to see the big picture, to see the issues with some clarity. It isn't about winning. It's about restoring the nobility that used to be associated with the term public service. I said to one of my critics, with this guy's background, he could say the heck with politics and go into the private sector and make a fortune for himself. With his academic background, his skills, he could go into the private sector and make a boatload of money. That tells me he's running for the right reasons. He cares. His children. He's concerned about their future. He understands what's happening. He has an economics degree. He understands what's happening in this country. 2 weeks ago, Barron's, sister publication of the Wall Street Journal, finance guys read, ran a story, Congressional Budget Office. I want you to pay close attention to these numbers. Congressional Budget Office revised their 10-year projections. And they went back and revised it because we now are seeing subpar 2% growth in our GDP, gross domestic product. We had 3.5% growth for 100 years. It's down to 2. And there is nothing, believe me, with my background, I'd see some sign there that there's something to indicate that 2% is going to get better. I don't see any evidence to support that it is in the near term. 10 years. 10 years. Our debt to GDP ratio will be the equivalent of Greece in 10 years. Math, when it crosses an ocean, it doesn't change. It's still math. It doesn't change. You know, people say, "Oh, that doesn't happen here."
This is America. That can't happen.
Well, wait a minute. Let me go back. Let me go back to my calculator and use American math.
That's right.
That's probably what I did wrong. I used European math. I used Asian math. That's probably what I did. Let me go back here. Yeah, it's silly. The debt to GDP ratio will be the equivalent of Greece in 10 years. Today, December the 4th? 3rd. Starting there, we're 30. December the 3rd, over 10,000 Americans today turn 65. Over 10,000 today. Tomorrow, over 10,000 Americans will turn 65. That's every day. Every day for the next 15 years. Now absorb that. Over 10,000 a day are turning 65. The interest cost on the debt this year's budget, I think, is worth $435 billion, somewhere around there. And that's 10-year treasuries right now at about 2.3%. What's going to happen when rates start to pick up? Rob, you have an economics background.
It's called a death spiral.
The interest on the debt, coupled with 2% subpar growth, coupled with over 10,000 Americans turning 65, the pressure on Medicare, Social Security, you're beginning to get, and it come down here to give you indigestion, ruin your dinner. But to illustrate a point, conservatives and libertarians better work together. I mean, I feel like we're a bunch of firefighters dropped into one of the brush fires on the hillside in California, and all of a sudden the flames are all around us. We better have each other's back. What is the point in warring with each other over these social issues when so much is at stake? Now, 2 libertarian candidates, Rob, and for anyone else who's intending in the future to run for political office, allow me to share with you a suggestion. You know, in boxing, there's an old saying, if you have a glass jaw, you don't leave with it. That means if you took a hit in the jaw and you were going to get knocked out, I always take with the forehead. I have an Irish head. So that was relatively easy to assure that I stay on my feet. If you have a glass jaw, you don't leave with it. If you have hot button issues that you know are going to alienate, you don't leave with them. And if I were advising a evangelical conservative candidate who believes in the conventional definition of marriage, who is against abortion on demand, who is against decriminalization of certain drugs, I would tell that conservative candidate who espouses these evangelical views on certain social issues, don't leave with a glass jaw. That is not abandoning your principle. It's not abandoning your principle. You will be asked by the media and by the press what's your position on this, and this. But don't lead in your literature, don't lead on your website, don't lead in your speeches with these issues. Those folks are going to be with you regardless. Those folks, you already have them. You know,
in politics and training I went through years ago, the instructor who taught this training said, there's 3 types of voters, Bob. Saints, sinners, savables. The saints are already with you. You know, I marvel at these folks in the Tea Party. You know, if they do that, some of them sit at their computer all day long, and they send each other in the Tea Party emails. and I think, boy, if this isn't, you know, if this isn't stupid, I mean really stupid, to sit there and just circulate emails among people. You're singing to the choir, aren't you? What's the point? You don't spend your time and energy on the saints. Those people are already with you. The sinners. You are never going to convince someone who digs their heels in, spent a lifetime at the teat of government largesse, that cutting government is a good idea. You're not going to do that. That's the sinners. Don't spend your time on those people. Spend your time in a campaign, knocking on doors, handing out literature, in your speeches. You reach out to the savables. They're the ones who are open-minded enough to listen to your ideas and possibly be persuaded that your message might have some viability. Might be worth considering that candidate's position on that. I strongly supported the war in Iraq, and within a period of about 10 years, I came around to recognize we gained it. Absolutely. Nothing. I was wrong. And I'm a sable. I'm open-minded enough to reconsider. Now, Afghanistan may be a little bit different issue. I like to go after where, you know, the people that they're trying to kill us, let's say, let's go get them. But you have to go after in politics the savables, the ones who are open-minded enough and haven't dug their heels in on a particular issue. You know, the social conservatives who say same-sex marriage, those people can't procreate. A society will die off if you permitted that. Oh, that's true. So there's a certain truth to that. But then you have to go back to, what do you really believe? What's the Constitution say on the top? Okay? It's up to the states. So I would suggest those of you who plan future political races, running on any ticket, doesn't matter. Don't leave with a glass jaw on issues that you're going to needlessly alienate possible supporters when it's not necessary. And I'd give that advice to any candidate of any particular party affiliation. I want to thank you for having me this evening. Rob, as always, I hope you have not crossed public service off your list. You're going to wander off and need people like you to stay and continue to pursue. Are there any questions that I can answer for anyone? Yes.
What do you see ultimately happening with the schism between the Republican apologist Tea Party groups and the more independent-minded?
That's a good question. The establishment has the money. I'm always, maybe I'm a little bit still at 60, a little too idealistic, but I feel like eventually right will prevail, and we're right. The Republican Party apologists, they're intellectually a little shallow. They cannot yet get their mind around the idea that there is a point in time when the less of two evils, you cannot continue to buy into that mentality. See, the Republican, that's how the establishment has controlled conservatives. You know, they get in the back room, they come to our meetings, at an election cycle, and man, they're Tea Partiers. They're really Tea Partiers. Okay? Until they're elected. And then the party bosses tell them, this is our agenda. You know, forget what you told those people, because that doesn't matter. Here's our agenda. This is what, you know, Tommy Norman, Howe, Stosh, I don't care who's in the governor's seat. No offense intended there, Rob. But the reality is, you have 4 or 5 guys down there that run Virginia. And the governor warms the chair unless the governor has incredible integrity, and I think Rob would have stood up to them, and is willing to abandon the costs that come along with standing up to those guys. And you're not going to have the lucrative job offers and director's fees when you leave the mansion if you take those vested interests off, or you can leave the governor's mansion and put your wife and every one of your kids on some board and rein in. I think sometimes today politicians get, the only purpose of having a spouse is conduit and funnel money through. And it really is. I'm looking at, I review disclosure forms on a regular basis. And let me tell you something, you get into the nitty gritty of these disclosure forms and you start looking at where their income comes from, it's sickening. It's truly sickening. And we're going to expose it. And there's many of those within the Tea Party that say, Bob, you're going to put what on a sign? I'm going to put on a sign what a congressman's wife is knocking down every year at breakfast. Now, there's a lot of people. Yeah, I know. He's going to do it.
Hell yeah.
There's nothing wrong with it.
Yeah, he's going to do it. And you know what? I'm not running for anything. That's the beauty of being where I'm at. There are no repercussions. They don't like it.
You know you're doing the right thing. Yeah.
Yeah.
You know, my 11 grandkids look at me.
Yeah.
And that's, you know, all the reinforcement that I need. My life has value is the 11 of them when I get to have them around me. That's all the reinforcement I need. I could care less what the hacks think about me. On the issue relative to how do you deal with the question when it comes up among the Republican Party apologists, you have to decide, are these sinners or savable? And cut your losses. Let me tell you something. After Rob spoke in Mechanicsville, and I'll tell you what I said. After Rob spoke in Mechanicsville, 6, 7 people, never missed a meeting for 4 years, haven't been back since. And I brought the issue up at our last meeting. You know what I said? I'm glad to be rid of them. They were dead wood. I had to keep stepping. Good riddance. You know, if you got to fight, you can win a fight with a battalion of draftees. Their heart's not in it. They don't want to be there. All they want to do is get out and go home. Or you can go in with a company, battle-tested, hardened, fearless, and they believe in the cause. I'll take the company over the battalion any day of the week. Any day of the week. Because they don't believe in the fight, like these people that haven't come back to the meeting in Mechanicsville. They were dead wood. And I was tired of tripping. I was tired of spending my time explaining to them for the 50th time why we can't support a candidate just because they have an R next to their name. It's stupid. Yeah, it's stupid. I don't care which side of the aisle you're on. You know, if that's your only, if your political acumen is so shallow, that's the extent of your involvement. You know, I had a family member say to me, "You're going after with me." Well, yeah, I am. Why? He's a Republican. Oh, his name only. in name only. I mean, yeah, he runs on the Republican ticket. He's got an R next to his name. And take a look at every one of the agencies that rate an elected official's legislative record. Take a look at his scores. Compare his scores to, you know, any number of Democrats from the South, and there's barely any difference. Any other questions? Yes, sir.
I've done a little bit of canvassing in my political career. I think it's the most important single thing you can do. Knocking on doors, but there's a way to data mine what you're finding for a certain personalities to be over and over. You know, during the Clinton campaign, we actually got a matrix, a 4x4 matrix of 16 emotions. You can circle the ones that seem to fit that person. The idea was that we couple that to a name of registered voter and talk about certain issues and see the responses. One was like a guy did that done by playing a liberal emotion. And you circle one that seems the most appropriate. Well, you come back and you got the next campaign cycle, next campaign cycle. You can start to actually data mine changing positions of individuals.
Sure. Well, and
any ideas on how to make that more effective?
Absolutely. And a candidate, I think, you know, a quality a successful candidate will have is a certain adeptness. You know, you got to be quick on your feet. And I've done tons and tons and tons of canvassing all over Virginia and collecting signatures. And I'll never forget, I was down in Chesapeake, beautiful day. I was in this nice neighborhood in Chesapeake collecting signatures for candidates we were trying to get on the ballot. Beautiful day. And the neighborhood was this beautiful, exquisite neighborhood, you know, with water backing up to the bay. It was just a great place to be, a lovely way to spend a day. I knocked on the door, a lady come to the door, and I said, I'm trying to get this lady on the ballot to run against George Allen in the primary. Would you sign a petition? Well, you know, I really like Governor Allen. I said, yes, ma'am, I like him too. He seems like a nice fellow. I just don't want him back in the U.S. Senate. Would you sign a petition so I can get Miss So-and-so on the ballot? This must vote for her. This is just to get her on the ballot. Well, you know, I really like Governor Allen. And I said, you know, let's come to a compromise. I need this signature on this petition. How about you invite Governor Allen, since you like him so much, over to a cookout this weekend and sign my petition? That didn't work. So I said, you know, I'm getting a signature. I mean, you know, I am a pit bull. I set my mind on something. And I won't walking off this porch, lady, until you sign this petition. And I said, man, can I ask you a question? We're about the same age. And it's a doggone shame there's not many women in the office. Don't you agree with that? And I had her. She said, I think it's a crying shame. Men been running things for just way too long. And I said, well, I'm working for this. Let me sign your petition. So maybe I wore her down. Maybe finally, appealing to the feminine side of her persona, and we need more women in public office. That adept skill, and you do it. Years ago, I made cold calls at the beginning of my career, and when you're trying to get an appointment, you're making hundreds of cold calls. You're trying to get an appointment. You either better get good, or you better like talking on the phone until 10 o'clock. I didn't like talking on the phone, so I thought I'm going to go around and listen to some of these guys that have been doing it for a long time and are really good at it, and pick up, beg, borrow, and steal most of the ideas I have. Beg, borrow, and steal. So yeah, you're right. You can tailor that. You've seen our signs, our Tea Party signs around. We have 175, 200 of them now. Hanover, King William, and Richmond. Very proud of them. We're trying to get other Tea Party groups to get, because believe me, I'm not going to take your time up, those signs change legislators' votes. And I can sit here, I wrote a 3,000-word document over the weekend and sent it to about 30 people across the state. And in it, I detailed specific examples where we had congressmen dig their heel in on an issue. And I said, it's a little bit, sometimes you got to be a little bit Michael Corleone. Sometimes, congressmen, are you certain? That's your position on that issue. Okay. Then you go back and, you meet with the consigliere. And you say, horse's head. Okay, and the horse's head in my vernacular is the Tea Party signs on the side of the road. They do not like seeing, you know, this supervisor, one of the supervisors we took out in King William, he championed, he's a fiscal conservative. Fiscal conservative, Bob Shannon. First thing he did when he was elected in 07, food and beverage tax. Here we come. Everybody else has it, we need it. And I lambasted him, that was in 07, and I fought with him about that. And it passed by 50 votes. So in the run-up to the election, among a number, we had the real estate tax issue in King William, which we really pounded into the ground. Got a lot of traction out of that issue. But I put on several of the signs, these are 4x8 yellow signs, the ads in the American flag, several signs, eating out costing you more? Thanks Cecil Schools, November 2nd. And we had a certain delegate come down there. You know, I think they sense, you know, we're going to get these guys. And we had a certain popular delegate come down there, and he put his arm around this guy, and his picture below local newspapers. And I did relish it on election night when I went down to the courthouse. We were counting all the votes. So every once in a while, you know, I still got to let that kidney shot go. You know, you got to have a little fun when you're doing this. But again, we drove the principle home. You championed a tax increase, okay? Now you're going to account for it. And those signs, ba-boom, ba-boom, ba-boom. I emailed this guy up in D.C. area that's doing the overpass thing. Have you seen that making its way around on YouTube? He's got the banners hanging out on the overpasses. And just a wonderful man. And he's, much like me, a little bit of an Irish animal. He's having a little bit too much fun with us. And he said to me this morning when I talked to him, you know, the media's painting this picture, the conservative movement, you know, the Tea Party movement, conservative principles, they're dying out. They're fading. Support for the Tea Party is fading. Here's a 2-minute video. They hung a banner on an overpass, Brooklyn Bridge Road in Laurel, Maryland, right off of 495. And it said, honk, you know, if you support, and the banner said, you know, defund Obamacare. Let me tell you something. It was non-stop for 2 minutes. It would have burst your ears if you had been in traffic. So this notion that conservative, libertarian, strong constitutional adherence to the Constitution, the idea that, let me look, you want further evidence, you want recent evidence of it? Who won the 18 to 24-year-old bracket in this last this election in Virginia? No, Cuccinella was doing. Now, stop for a minute. Stop for a minute. Was that because 18 to 24-year-olds love the evangelical views that Ken Cuccinelli embodies? No. Is that because the 18 to 24-year-olds, it's slowly getting through to them? Big government. You know, when I talk to these kids, I speak to these kids up at Georgetown, I tell them, look, hey, this isn't about me. I'm in the, you know, I'm in the what, you know, bottom of the 8th maybe? You know, the game's about over for me. So this isn't about me anymore. This is about you. You know, you do not quite yet appreciate what an economic tsunami is heading your way. I am of the opinion, and I don't think there's a political salvation or a political solution to this. I think the U.S. is destined, much like the Israelites wandered in the desert for 40 years. I think the U.S. is destined for a 25-year period of a serious reduction in the standard of living. I don't think at this point there's any way to get around it. Now, can we, at the end of that period, you know, restore economic principles that worked You know, stop a minute. I'm going to share one last thing with you, and I'm going to get out of here. I asked these kids at Georgetown 2 weeks ago, why is it? Set your politics aside for a minute and just use your thinking cap. Why is it at the end of the 20th century, as the 20th century came to a close, former Soviet Union, Eastern Bloc, Eastern European nations, the centrally planned economies in Asia, why was, as the 20th century came to a close, all of these countries, the governments were moving towards respect for private property, more liberty, not less, more respect for religious freedom and freedom of speech, a much less centrally planned economic model, more of a capitalist flavor, and a movement away. And why is it when all of these nations who had spent a century under the totalitarian regimes, the centrally planned economies, the repression of people's free speech, why is it as those large swaths of the world were moving more towards models that this nation embodied for the first 2 centuries of its existence, and the United States was moving exactly in the opposite direction? Put your thinking caps on, young people, and ask that question. You know, one of our signs, the other national deficit, critical thinking. The other national deficit, critical thinking. Ask that question. And every time I go up there and speak to those kids, I always reach 1 or 2 of them. It makes fighting the traffic in D.C. and, $100 to park your car, it makes it worth it. Because I walk out of that school knowing I reached 1 or 2 of those kids that day, and that was worth giving up. Those kids are coming out of it. It's a prestigious school. And those kids are going to be leaders somewhere. And if I can reach 1 or 2 of them, it's not going to benefit me. I'll be dead. But 25 years from now, as they move into leadership positions, either in government or industry, they'll remember that light bulb that Mr. Shannon tripped in 2012 or 13 when he was up here speaking to us. It's about control. That's why the United States is moving. We have this humongous government, this self-perpetuating machine. The only way they can continue to perpetuate this gravy train they're on is to take over broader and broader swaths of our economic and our personal lives. It's about control. Thank you very much for having me this evening. And the possibilities of our working with the be a saveable.